After 10 meritorious years at the helm of the National Bureau of Statistics, Dr. Yemi Kale, on August the 16th, stepped down as the Statistician-General of the Federation. As Chief Executive of the agency, Dr. Kale will be remembered for transforming the NBS into a data powerhouse and superintending over the rebasing of the Nigerian economy after a 24-year interregnum. Under him, the NBS also expanded the provision of data from mere reports on inflation, quarterly GDP figures, and periodic unemployment data to include national household data, transportation data, states IGR data, and capital importation reports, among many others. Now joining us from our Abuja studio is Dr. Yemi Kale, a respected economist and former Statistician-General of the Federation. He will be talking to us about his achievements and the challenges he encountered at the National Bureau of Statistics and what more needs to be done to improve data collection in the country. Good morning, Yemi Kale, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, very good. Well, let's start with the achievements and the challenges. Many commentators have said, well, you managed during your 2 terms of service in office to turn around the NBS. And we all agree, of course, that data without planning, or rather planning without data, does not make any sense. But under your watch, in fairness to you, you managed to push the agenda of data being available on a regular basis for planning. And then, of course, you also had partnership with foreign agencies and all of that. Could you share with us what your experience was and the challenges that you faced in specific terms?
Thank you for that. I think I will start by, when I think back about my time at the NBS, I remember coming in where there was very little data being published. Whatever data was being published did not have any, it wasn't being used significantly by policymakers, by businesses, by data users. There was no trust in the data. There was very poor funding. Very little was being done. And I think all I did was to try and understand my mandate given to me by the president, well, the 2 presidents, and try to ensure that I achieved that mandate. You had situations where even collecting the data, respondents were not particularly trusting. They didn't want to deal with this data. We had to work on that. We had instances where funding for data collection was unbelievably poor. We had situations where the staff's motivation for doing their work was very low. In fact, some of them have told me that in the past, they used to be ashamed to say where they work. And they say that this has changed today because they believe that the work that the NBS does today is being given a lot of respect, it's been taken very seriously. So you have to fight all these challenges, getting funding for the data, ensuring that data respondents trust you. And when the data is collected, you have to ensure that it is used by policymakers. There were so many outdated methodologies and processes. So it was a whole lot of work that needed to be done. But I'm lucky that I always shared the support of my supervisory ministers and my extremely hardworking staff. And they made all this easy for us to accomplish, and we'll accomplish it together.
Well, my question was about methodology. Can you take us through how you accomplished your data collection? How did you use tech, for example?
Well, to start with, when I came in, we were using paper-based questionnaires. So you have our thousands of staff across the country, and we have offices in every state. We have staff that live in all the states. So they are the ones that collect the data. They're not collected from Abuja. Now, they would take bundles of paper to different areas and collect data manually, enter them manually on a paper with pen and so on. And then when that is collected, all those thousands of papers have to now be sent to the headquarters. Then the second round, where data entry personnel will sit down and start entering them manually. It made the data very slow. It was subject to a lot of errors. People could actually sit under the mango tree and just cook up any data. And so it was extremely difficult. So the idea was to shift completely from paper to to tech. For example, one of the ways we did that, we moved to computer-assisted personal interview devices. Now, these devices are GPS-enabled, so you can actually track where the staff are going and collect that data. You can actually go back and repeat the process in the exact location. The situations where anybody can sit under a mango tree cannot happen any longer because you can see where the data is being collected. You had situations where it was much faster, so you can get the data online real time. Sitting in my office, I can actually tell where all my staff were and collecting data as the data was being collected. So you now have a situation room, whereas every survey was being done, you have the ICT people checking the data, because as soon as they collect each entry, they send it, it goes straight to the headquarters. Data processes can be working on that data, checking whether it's accurate, whether it makes sense. And if there's a challenge, they can reach the field workers while they're on the field to ask questions about some entry that's coming, as opposed to the past where you're using paper, where it will be 4 or 5 months before you can even tell whether there's an error, and it's too late to do anything about it. The use of satellite imagery to actually select the samples, because you go to certain areas and you find that maybe because of security issues, the population that you expected are in a particular location no longer there. So before you go to the field now, you can actually use satellite imagery to actually ensure that you draw your sample correctly, because the objective of a sample is to ensure it's representative. If you go to the field and don't find anybody in a particular location, it will affect the outcome of that survey. So again, using that technology, when COVID happened, we couldn't go to the field for obvious reasons. So we had a call center where partnering the telecommunications companies, we used the GSM devices that hundreds of millions of Nigerians have. So our staff actually just have to sit down in the office and then ask their questions just by making a phone call. So those are some of the examples of the things we did to try and make data collection more accurate and timely. And of course, in dissemination of the data. When I came, we were just publishing hard copies. So an agency that has very limited funding will probably produce maybe 500 copies, 1,000 copies of a particular report of about 700, 1,000 pages. It was not efficient. What we did was to revamp our website, make it more efficient, and rather than publishing hard copies that couldn't really circulate, we just put all the data on the website, and because of that, it was reaching a much wider audience. We get over 100, 200,000 downloads of our report, over 2 million hits regularly. So by doing that, we were able to reach a larger audience in terms of data. We were also able to save money from the hard copy prints that never got anywhere and use that to produce even more data. So these are some of the strategies that myself and my team at MBS sat down and used to ensure that data was more widespread and was produced more efficiently, more accurately. And finally, it had to do with trust of the general public. Even to today, there's still some people that have doubts every now and then, but it's significantly better than it used to be 10 years ago. What we did was just opened up the office. Anybody that has their doubt, we invited them to join our staff. During the field work, we invited the press, come and watch what these staff are doing, follow them as their interviewing staff, see how we are processing the data. We opened up our systems to everybody to come and anybody that wanted to criticize, come and criticize. So I think some of our strongest critics, once they came in and saw exactly how this was being done, they became one of our strongest advocates. So that's, again, how we try to build trust and improve the work we are doing.
I mean, thank you so much, and congratulations as you further your life and do other great things with your life and after your time here. I want to ask you about the big elephant in the room. That's sample size. What's the sample size like based on the data you crunch? And when this data is being mined, where do you bank the data? Do you mine the data? Do you do other things with it? What else do you interface with the data, really? And the sample size. I want to know how big the sample size is.
There is no fixed sample size for any survey. The sample size is determined by our methodology department, depending on the particular survey that is meant to be. So there's no adequate sample size for any particular survey. It depends on the survey, it depends on the objective of the survey, the information you're trying to get. But the objective is not really the size. It's ensuring that whatever size you pick is representative of the whole, and that's what matters. So even if you go, let's use labor force, for example, you go to countries like the US, Canada, and so on, their sample size that they use when they do their survey is smaller than the ones we use in Nigeria. Now, the reason is because of the peculiarities of of our country and the difficulty reaching certain areas, our sample size has to be much bigger. I'm sure many of you would see during the US elections, the sample size that were used by many of these big agencies, well, you see 2,000, and it was fairly accurate. So it's not, again, the size of the sample that matters. It's ensuring that it's representative. And this is determined by the particular survey you are trying to conduct, and the information you are trying to get. So I've heard people say there's a difference between a sample and a survey and a census. A survey is a sample of a whole. A census is counting everything. We can't. No country goes and counts everybody for every piece of data. Every country, most countries in the world, for most of their data collection, use the exact same methodologies that we are using at MBS. We are not reinventing the wheel. We are not doing anything unusual. We are doing exactly the way it is done internationally. We're a member of the United Nations Statistics Commission, and it's at that commission that all the countries, statistics of the countries, sit down and agree on standardized methodologies and systems that would ensure data accuracy, and that's exactly what we do. In terms of the data we collect a whole lot more data than we publish. So in just a survey on unemployment or inflation, we collect a lot more data than is required for that particular report. Now that additional data is kept in our data bank. When we have specific requests that are not exactly relating to the particular subject matter, it's easy for us to go back into that database and mine a new set of data to fit those requests. So we get lots of specific requests from our government. We get specific requests we have actually gotten specific requests from individuals doing their PhDs. We've gotten specific requests from businesses, some of them in the food, beverage, space, and several others that want to do certain things. We've got a specific request from our development agencies. These are not published, but they are information that already exists in our data bank, and that's basically how we do our work. I think maybe only about 20-30% of the data we collect is actually made public because that's the objective of what we are trying to collect. But there's a whole lot more data in the data bank that's not even being looked at.
Well, how did you deal with political reactions to the data that the MBS under your watch published? You'll recall, for instance, that the Minister of Labor and Employment, Dr. Chris Ngige, disagreed with the unemployment data that you released, and so did some governors. So how did you handle that?
Well, I'm extremely stubborn, which a few of my friends have said is a requirement for the job, a good requirement for the job. But on a serious note, when I started this job, I remember mentioning to my key staff that, look, if I'm going to do this job right, I must be ready to be fired at a moment's notice. So if you go to my office or my previous office, I never really settled down properly because I expected that any time I could be removed. And that was the price I was prepared to pay for trying to do the job properly. I said, look, there's no way to do this job properly if I'm concerned about my job, because it will make me do things to keep my job as opposed to do what is right. So that was the first. I had to convince myself that it is just a job. I'm serving my country and I'll serve it correctly. And I'm ready to lose my job for doing the right things. And I'm not ready to keep my job for doing the wrong things. Once I convinced myself that that's the way it was going to go, I didn't particularly care about any political attacks or any opinions that were not. All I did was ensure that we followed the correct methodology. Before the report came out, I was very hands-on. I would check, because I knew that if anybody finds any mistakes, then they can use that against me. I would check every single thing, ensure that things are done properly. Once I'm very confident about it, it goes out. And anybody can make their comments about whether they think the data is correct or not. We will defend it based on evidence, the work we did, and we show it to them that this is exactly what we did. But in terms of political interference, I don't think it's new to Nigeria. I think, I remember even in the US, the former President Trump, he would always agree with good data and say the ones that he didn't like, he didn't believe they were correct. So that's even the US. So I wasn't fazed by different comments made by different people that did not agree. We're not supposed to publish data that is agreed by anybody. We're supposed to publish data that is correct and accurate in line with what comes out from the field, and that's exactly what we focused on. But I think the most important thing was ensuring that my mind was focused on this is the mandate of the office. The mandate of the office is not to keep me in office. The objective of the job is not to extend my tenure and make sure I finish. The objective of the office is to produce reliable, accurate data, full stop. And I think that once I concentrated on that, it made all the other things difficult to hear, sometimes extremely stressful to go through, but that was it for me. I'll do what is right, and if I lose my job, I lose my job. And that stuck with me throughout.
Well, collation of data has really been hamstrung by paucity of funds. How can the MBS raise more funds to produce reports that are crucial for national and economic development?
Yes, even till today, the funding situation in the MBS is still completely appalling. If you compare it to even some countries in Africa, Kenya has a statistics budget that is 5 times larger than ours. South Africa, I don't even want to discuss that. South Africa's budget is almost 20 times larger. I don't want to start discussing developed countries that even already have technology and systems to collect data. They still spend 100 times more on data collection, despite but I have to also appreciate the fact that since I came, the funding for data has increased. When I got into the office, I saw a budget of less than 100 million naira a year to collect every single data, and I was stunned. And I can remember my first budget defense, and I was asked what to do with what I was going to do with the budget. I came with nothing, and everybody was surprised. I said, "Look, I'm not going to just allocate 100 million across projects when I know that they cannot complete any project. It's a waste of time. We're not going to do anything because this money is not enough to do anything seriously. I don't follow the policy of just collecting money and just putting figures across projects when I know it's not going to do anything. Since this money is not enough to do anything, then we will not be producing anything this year." And they were a bit surprised. And of course, I got into trouble as usual, but that was the reality. But in the last 10 years, our budget has gone from about 100 million to over 1 billion. So there's been a progressive increase in the funding of data. And I have to appreciate all my supervising ministers, from Dr. Samshidin Usman, Udoma, and Dr. Zainab Ahmed and Prince Clem Agba. They have been extremely supportive and trying to provide more funding for the office, even though it's inadequate. We have tried to see many different ways to get money outside the budget. We understand. I spoke to one of the former ministers of finance, I not say, and the message I got is, look, people want to see roads, they want to see bridges. The work you do is not something Nigerians can see. We cannot defend giving money to you because nobody's going to see it, and maybe for political reasons, we have to be able to show things that people can feel and touch. And I remember telling the minister then that, look, when you have lack of funds, that is when you need data the most, because I'm the one going to tell you where to put resources, whether education needs more money than health, whether health needs more money than agriculture. So by saying that because you don't have funds, you would not fund statistics is the wrong strategy as far as I'm concerned. But again, I don't think I was listened to at the time. But at MBS, we have tried to look outside the budget. We thought about selling data. We did not want to do that because, in our opinion, data is a public good. We don't want a situation where the public has to pay millions of naira to collect the data that should be free for them to use to evaluate the performance of their economy and their elected officials. We didn't want to charge people to collect simple data. So we stepped that down. We looked at the provision of a statistics trust fund for MBS, so that not just MBS, but the national statistical system, which includes all the other MDAs, we tried to push that through FECA, National Assembly. Did not really get far because I think people were not comfortable with data as much as important as it is to be a first-line charge. We also tried to look at creating specialized services where outside the general reports that we make public, the GDPs and so on, private sector companies, maybe food, beverage, banking companies, banks rather, would approach us for specific services they need for their particular company. It's kind of like market research. We try to make money from that as well. But again, at the end of the day, all this is extremely negligible in a country where the use of data, even though it has grown significantly, is still significantly insignificant. We like to take decisions based on gut feeling a lot. Even sometimes doing policy making, it's what I feel. If I believe this is the right thing to do, I do it. Then I try and look for the data that defends my position. Rather than using the data in the first place to decide that policy, we decide the policy, the program or project, and then look for data that matches it. And if we don't have data that matches it, we dismiss the one that is existing that contradicts that, and we create our own data to defend a particular policy and say the official one is wrong. And that's the approach that we have been taking, and the approach that even I think some companies also take. There's no strong appetite for data. I can tell you this because I've approached several companies, and you can see that they're not really keen on, yet anyway, on having a data-led strategy. Unlike many other countries in the world who have used data to drive their economies, there's a direct relationship between countries that take their data seriously and their level of development. And I always say that I think a lot of the reasons why we are where we are today is because people did not look at the data before taking decisions. A lot of the challenges that we are facing can be fixed if we understand what the data says. Imagine speaking to, I remember just very quickly speaking to one of the governors a few years ago, and he said, SG, I'm going to create 200,000 jobs in a year. And I told him, Your Excellency, who told you need 200,000 jobs? Where did you get that figure from? You can't just pick out a number from the air and say, I'm going to create 200,000 jobs. Who says you need 200? You might need 100, you might need 400. Why are you deciding to pick 200? You need to get the data in your state to understand how many people are unemployed, how many people are entering the labor market on a yearly basis, what their qualifications are, and so on. 200,000 jobs in what? Aeronautical engineering? In what? In physics? You have to understand the different, you have to understand your economy, your state, before you start coming up with policies. Otherwise, at the end of the day, you will just fail.
Okay, Dr. Kale. So much to unpack. Two quick questions. Number one will be, policymakers and the use of, your data. How often do they use it? Because, like you said before, it's only when it favors them that they use, the data. What has been the uptake of data in policy, articulation and policy use? Secondly, the recent GDP numbers, 5.01. Can you just tell me some of the methodologies we use at arriving at that? And just explaining, the base effect. Quickly.
To be fair, it's not right that all policymakers only accept data that favors them. There are quite a few of them that my ministers, for example, budget and national planning, will take the data as it is, and they've actually defended it very strongly on many occasions, whether good or bad. It's not every minister that is not prepared, or it's not every policymaker that is prepared to only look at data that is in favor of them. But there are those that, of course, prefer that approach. In terms of the use of policymaking, data for policymaking has increased significantly. You will find that MBS is almost always on almost any committee of government that has to do with the economy. Some of them might not even be made public. There are several occasions where there are concerns about food prices, and I'll be called to make presentations to explain what is going on, to offer advice. The central bank, at their monetary policy committee meeting, the governor is always insisting I come to give an overview, but 20, 30 minutes of what I think is going on in the economy, the numbers are saying, so they can help the MPC members make their decisions. The Presidential Economic Advisory Council, headed by Dr. Salami, I do regular monthly presentations to them as well on the state of the economy, unpack the numbers. So there are several instances where even at the Federal Executive Council, every now and then, I have to make a presentation on the state of the economy, or to defend some of the numbers that have come out. But at the end of the day, there are people that are actually listening and trying to take decisions based on data. The current GDP, some of the reactions I saw are surprising, because the data for seasonality purposes is year on year. So what you are doing is comparing the situation in Nigeria today, or in that quarter, to the quarter in the previous year. So I always say the first question to ask is, in this quarter compared to the quarter in question, do people feel that things are exactly the same? Now, this quarter in question was the period when COVID hit, when there were lockdowns. There was barely any, there was a lot of economic activity was stopped. Now, if you check that data, you will see that one of the sharpest growths were for trade, and of course, there was very little trading going on during that period, was for transport. I think transport grew by 90%, but of course it did, because you locked down the economy for about a month, and even when you opened it, not a lot of transportation activities was going on. So if people unpack, rather than looking at the headline figure, and unpack the data, break down the sectors, and look at what is responsible for growth, they will understand exactly how the base effects worked and how the economy can grow at 5%. If you check other countries in the world, Theirs were even as high as 20%. Countries that have never grown by 20% in, I don't know, 20, 30 years. But because they are comparing it to a period of the pandemic, you have that buffer. The methodologies we use for GDP, again, are similar to what is used in every country in the world. The system of national accounts is what is used to determine GDP growth in every sector. It's nothing unusual. It's the same procedures that we use everywhere in the world. And we follow those principles religiously. And we use the most updated SNA prescribed by the United Nations National Statistics Commission. Most African countries don't even do that yet. So that's the way I recommend that your listeners go and pick up. You can pick up the SNA. It's very easily available online, and look and go through it, and you see how each sector is supposed to be classified. Even if you look at the report, you will see a summary of the methodology that tells you how each particular economic activity is computed. Just a quick summary, so it's easy to understand.
Well, Dr. Yemi Kale, so much to still talk about. For example, the effort made under your watch to include GDP data for the states, although you excluded Lagos State, and also questions about your successor. Do you think that you will be able to carry on from where you stopped, considering the fact that you were also involved in his selection, which is a very unusual thing? And then I would have loved to ask you about the National Planning Commission, the primary user of data. And as it were, that National Planning Commission has been off the radar for quite some time. So if the National Planning Commission is not working, then what next? But we'd like to thank you very much for joining us this morning, and we wish you all the best in your next endeavor. Thank you very much indeed.